I'm not going to rehash the why that we hear. We all know that agriculture is the biggest footprint of humans on the planet, that we have only 1 in 3 people in the world are eating a healthy diet. So there are compelling reasons for improving and transforming our food systems. But first I'm going to give a little Australian perspective. Australia, I think, right now is suffering from PTSD, National Post-Traumatic Stress Syndrome. We've just been through our hottest and driest year on record after 3 years of intense drought in the eastern states. And December was 3.2 degrees above our long-term baseline. A huge area, about 40 million acres in the old language, 16 million hectares, larger than lots of little countries in Europe, has been incinerated. Amazingly, we've only lost 32 lives, tragically. But if these fires had occurred when I was a young forester fighting fires in the early 1980s, hundreds and hundreds of pre-mobile phones, pre-mass warning systems, pre-well-organised evacuations, many hundreds, if not thousands of lives would have been lost. Thousands of farmers have lost all their fences, many of their animals, all their equipment, and many, many people have lost their homes. It's very hard to know the cost, but it's a very big number. In wildlife terms, at least 1 billion native animals have been killed. Many endangered species have lost most of their remaining habitat. So the ones that survived the fires now emerge into a charred landscape with no food and with their predators now able to find them much more easily. And if you want to step through that, there's a brilliant graphic on the ABC. I studied forestry originally, allegedly, and when I was a young forester, we were taught by the great Dave Ashton, who literally wrote the book on eucalyptus ecology in southeastern Australia, that spotted gum forests like this don't burn. And they haven't in prehistory. And close to my holiday shack, where I ride my mountain bike, I love visiting this tree. Big Blotchy, we call him. National parks keep his location a secret. We don't want people sneaking in there to do some chainsaw artistry. And that's what it looks like now. 500,000 hectares of forest that won't burn, incinerated. We have to rewrite that book on forest ecology. We have areas of Gondwanan rainforest that have no ecological experience of fire, now incinerated. I went back to Big Blotchy, walked past all of the roadblocks and the signs saying you can't go into the national park, and it seems that someone had got in there and protected that tree. By hand, I think, and they were lucky that the fire must have been burning downhill or overnight when it got to that tree, and the tree survived. The bush around it, not so lucky. There's not just the fires, it's the aftermath. So whole vintage, I live in Canberra, we have a great wine growing area. The whole vintage is gone because of 2 months of smoke. The smoke seeps into the grapes, and then, as the winemaker said, you taste the first glasses from the vat for the vintage, and it's like licking from an ashtray. So they write off the entire vintage. And when I saw this headline in the New York Times, it didn't seem like an exaggeration for someone who's lived in Canberra through December and January, where our air quality every day was worse than Beijing, worse than New Delhi, worst in the world for several weeks. This is a young boy at Malakuta fleeing in a small boat across the water to get away from the flames with his family. So we're now confronting not incremental adaptation. We're now confronting, this is our top pyrogeographer suggesting we need to shift the summer holidays out of summer because summer's now too dangerous to have people in the forest and at the beach. So thinking about rewiring the Australian lifestyle. So if that recent experience informs this talk, and I'm not going to apologise for that. If I'm stressed and a bit erratic, then Australia may well be a glimpse into what other countries are going to be facing down the track. We live in the Anthropocene. If people aren't familiar with that term, it's the suggestion that we're now in a new geological epoch in which Homo sapiens is the dominant geological force on the planet, literally altering the basic biogeochemical cycles of planet Earth. We're obviously doing it in the atmosphere, we're doing it in the oceans, we're doing it elsewhere. In this human-centred epoch, what's the biggest tool in our toolkit? It's agriculture. That's the biggest thing we do on the planet. It's the biggest lever we have to pull. It employs the most people. It uses most of the water. It's the equal biggest emitter. It causes 78% of eutrophication of river systems and wetlands and lakes. It uses most of our ice-free and desert-free land. It clears most of the forests. It's the biggest impact on biodiversity, and it's by far the most effective way to lift people out of poverty. The yin and the yang of global agriculture. It's the single biggest thing we do, and it's our single biggest opportunity for change. Sorry about that. That's me 35 years ago, but I'm not ready for that part of the talk yet. So that's the why agriculture. I'm not going to go through and give a technical lecture on the opportunities for reducing emissions. You guys all know the toolkit, ruminant methane, paddy rice, nitrous oxides in cropping systems, increasing water use efficiency, decreasing food loss and waste, decreasing consumption of beef and dairy in rich countries. We've got to be very careful about demonising livestock because a hell of a lot of people on the planet depend entirely on livestock for their livelihoods, and they are not eating too much meat. So there's a big difference between Kansas and Kenya. The integration of renewable energy in agriculture, I firmly believe that agriculture globally should be a net producer of energy, not a net consumer of energy, and a net sink for carbon and not a net emitter. It's interesting for me as an Australian that our red meat sector, which manages about 2/3 of the continent, has a zero emissions by 2030 target, the red meat sector in Australia. So that's the technical menu. Decreasing deforestation, obviously, increasing reforestation and agroforestry, and in particular I'd make a special plea about mangroves. Mangroves versus aquaculture. Mangroves store 10 times as much carbon as tropical rainforests, and the emissions profile is very significant, and those are crucial opportunities for us. There's more detail about all of those options on the CCAF's website and the Global Research Alliance for Agricultural Greenhouse Gases. I'm now going to finish up with the how. We have to get far more sophisticated about social movements, and it's brilliant to see the different organisations represented in this room. And in my view, good old-fashioned extension when we come to agriculture actually needs to be dusted off and all the stuff that we've known for many decades applied very well. So I wasn't in a youth band, a boy band, and that's not my offsider with a wobble board. That's doing catchment planning in land care in the early 1980s. But there's a vast literature there on how you bring about social change that we should draw on. And we can't assume the private sector will do it. But the thing that frustrates me as an old ag extensionist is that we often expect suasion methodologies to work on their own. They're far more effective when we get all the tools out of the toolkit. Regulation, incentives, markets, property rights, pricing, taxation, and apply them in coordinated ways. We've done it brilliantly with smoking. We've done it brilliantly with seatbelts in cars. We've done it brilliantly in other areas of human endeavour. Why can't we do that with the food system? I'm going to finish up with just a couple of little vignettes from projects that ACIAR is funding with partners around the world that give me hope. And like the rector, I'm an incurable optimist. Here we are in the hills of Bohol, in central Visayas, in the southern Philippines, an area riven with conflict in the past. The Philippines have reinvented Australian land care, got communities working together, improved farming systems, improved local securities, conflict has gone down, sedimentation of the reservoir has gone down, revegetation's gone up, and that's now a functioning community where it wasn't before. Last week I was in Pakistan, and it was an absolute joy to see farmers teaching farmers using a very simple device for measuring how much water's in the root zone. And this device wirelessly sends information to a scheme level as well as showing each farmer what other farmers are doing. Again, in Eastern Africa, we've employed this Australian technology to ensure that people at the bottom of the system now get water where they never used to before, because everyone can see how much water the people at the top of the system are using. So now they use a lot less. In India with IMI, where farmers are able to change from diesel pumps to solar pumps and then sell their solar energy into the grid, guess what? Their water use efficiency improves by a factor of 10 because they've got an alternative market for that energy they've produced. I'm delighted to have my colleague Renaud from the Canadian IDRC here. The IDRC is partnering with ACIAR in Eastern Africa in a program called Cultiaf. One of our projects here in the Kibera slum, the largest slum in Africa, is using human waste from the slum, partnering with a German-French firm of young environmental engineers who've invented a simple composting toilet. The human waste is used to grow the larvae of the black soldier flies, big juicy maggots. And they increase their biomass 100-fold in 3 weeks. Imagine if you had a pig that grew 100 times in 3 weeks. And then they use solar energy to boil and sun-dry. And then these maggots are fed to village chickens. Radically improves the length of laying and the quality of the eggs and the production of the eggs for the village chicken. The waste on the right-hand side is used for green energy, back into the grid, and for organic fertiliser. And so here we have a project that improves sanitation in the slums, food security in the villages, green energy for the grid, uses no external water, no external nutrients, no external energy, and is on about 2 hectares of land. That's the sort of thinking that I want to see. That's the sort of closed loop, circular economy, food system thinking with social outcomes, environmental outcomes and economic outcomes. But we've all heard the saying that the pilot never fails and the pilot never scales. We've got to think about how to get these ideas into the mass market. And I'm just going to finish with a little plea about collaboration. Getting ideas from promising pilots to large-scale applications is going to require new collaborations across traditional boundaries on a scale that we've not used before. And I've put a lot of collaborations together over the years, and in my mind there's a simple formula you have to keep in mind. There are always good reasons to collaborate. Reducing duplication, reducing fragmentation, gaining critical mass, making best use of scarce resources, being more ambitious, taking on bigger risks so that if it fails you can say, well, the other partners made me do it. But against all those transaction costs, all those meetings, flying around the world, the loss of brand, the loss of identity, the dilution of your company, your organisation's logo is not necessarily sufficiently prominent. The opportunity costs of your people, your time, your money, your loss of control, having to go to bloody committee meetings to get anything done. The fact that sometimes collaborations go at the speed of the slowest partner. These are things that we need to get much better at dealing with. And so I'm making a plea here that we need to think about the how of collaboration and learn to do it much better across the private and public sector, across business and NGOs, with a much richer ecosystem of social society and business. And I must say I'm extremely encouraged by where business leaders are at. So the final metaphor I want to leave you with is fund the arrows. We're all used to seeing organograms with boxes and arrows, and usually the arrows denote information flow or whatever. And when you ask to see the budget headings always equate to the boxes. And so the arrows are just expected to happen magically. If you want real collaboration to happen, you actually need to resource it and give it time, people, brilliant expertise and the resources to make it happen. So I hope we can draw some of those ideas together as the day unfolds, because with brilliant collaboration we really can change the world, and in fact we must. Thank you.